Hi everyone and welcome. We're joined today by Nicolai Petro, a professor of political science at the University of Rhode Island, who served as the U.S. State Department Special Assistant for Policy on the Soviet Union under the administration of President Bush, that is Bush Sr. And yeah, welcome to the program.
Nice to be with you, Glenn, again.
Welcome back, I should say, probably. But
Thank you.
Well, I recently read an article of yours on the Trump Doctrine, and I thought this was a very interesting idea because people are really, well, trying to figure out what Trump is, what he says versus what he does, and yeah, well, I thought maybe perhaps you can start to explain that Trump Doctrine to understand at least his some how you see his foreign policy goals and also how he achieves these goals.
I wish I could. But uh, some interesting things. So, this was a speech given by Vice President J.D. Vance in Ohio to a group of, I think, Republican donors. And in it, he cited what he called the Trump Doctrine. Now, I was surprised that I haven't seen it discussed very much since then. In other words, I was talking to some colleagues on the internet, and they hadn't heard of it or hadn't seen it discussed much. I haven't seen it discussed aside from the first instance of the description of what Vice President Vance said. So it hasn't gotten the attention that this sort of statement by a senior official saying, well, here's our doctrine. I want everyone to know it. It hasn't gotten that attention. And one of the reasons may be that it's misnamed. It's not a doctrine. It is rather an explanation of the tactical moves that the president has made recently. But it doesn't seem to be much of a guide toward identifying what his priorities will be. There's, in fact, no discussion in the 3 points that he made to describe what I would call the approach that Trump personally uses when reaching a decision about what to do. There's no discussion of any ideals. There's no discussion of any vision of the world. There's no discussion of key alliances or key enemies or strategic objectives of the United States. So there's very little there to go on, except for the 3 points that he made, which can almost be described as an afterthought. Oh, now that we've done this, let's try to figure out and describe to others what we did.
What it's well, my reading of what he wanted to respond to at least, but interpreting his policies can be a bit challenging. But that Trump is effectively a reaction to the exhausted foreign policy model of the United States after the Cold War. That is, the ability to be everywhere at the same time, to have this global primacy based on alliances. So it looks like he's more into, well, he wants a greater return on investment on empire, if you will. He wants allies to pay for the security or the privilege to be defended. He doesn't want to he doesn't want to go after all the great powers at the same time to the extent they're being pushed together. He's concerned that all these commitments is overextending America. And of course, they're heading towards bankruptcy. Also, the
Yeah.
globalist model has deindustrialized America. It's weakened the sense of national identity. So he seems
But
well, I
Glenn,
wouldn't call him
you're
a
doing
Samuel
it.
Huntington, but it seems to be something in the line of Samuel Huntington he's thinking.
There you go.
but what it,
You're doing the work for them. You are
ah,
filling this bag, which has no shape, and we don't know what's in it, with content that, alas, I think you and I would like to see. And if that's the strategy, it's not a dumb strategy. If you don't know what you want, say very little, point out that whatever succeeded was what you wanted in the first place, and whatever you didn't want, well, that wasn't that wasn't our objective to begin with, and it wasn't our fault that it didn't work. And meanwhile, lots of intelligent pundits will come along and explain how the broader context of this, and maybe they'll take some of these ideas actually and fill in the gaps in their own strategy. My sense, when I see something described as a doctrine or a strategy, I'm looking for connections to a vision. Like, this is what we did, and in doing so, we had this objective, this long-term objective, and we're getting there through these steps, something along those lines. None of that is in this brief description, which, just to remind your readers, says there should be three things. There should be a clear American interest stipulated. Secondly, there should be aggressive diplomacy. Third, there should be U.S. military power involved to solve the problem if the aggressive diplomacy does not work. And then, when the problem is solved, and we should assume it will be solved either through aggressive diplomacy or with the backup of U.S. military power, you go in with overwhelming force and leave always before you get bogged down. So you enter at your own discretion, you leave at your own discretion, and you are always in charge of the situation that way. The situation never controls you. You are always in charge of the situation. This is a childish view of world affairs, I think. It's sort of like, someone coming to a playground saying, all these toys are mine. I allow you to play with them. But that's my generosity. You don't actually have anything of your own here. And, sadly, a lot of our senior political leaders, senators, important congressmen, they cannot see beyond this rhetoric. They embrace this rhetoric because they agree with the Trump administration that this simplistic narrative where America tells other nations what they must do, and they must do it, period, because we are America, and we are stronger, and we see further, and they should just do always what we want them to do for their own good, that this simplistic narrative is widely accepted and unchallenged in the United States. If you start to question our righteousness, well, nobody can make a political career in America based on challenging our own myths about ourselves.
it is a peculiar doctrine, though, given that, well, again, his initial rhetoric, especially during the campaign, was, America needed to have a more modest position in the international system. But what you're describing is a very hegemonic approach. That is, we will have our way. We'll try the diplomatic thing aggressively. If it doesn't work, we'll move on to the military. But this doesn't really reflect an international system which is becoming decentralized, more multipolar. But you outlined these steps which were identified. But there's a lot to unpack there. If we start with the first one you mentioned, that is first to articulate this clear American interest. And I guess a lot of this falls under America first, but what exactly are these American interests? Because even America first, which was kind of a powerful rallying call, and I think many people were attracted to it. That is, if you see the U.S. as a hegemon having exhausted its resources in running the world, you would now like to pull back and rebuild America's economy and strength. So this makes sense. But as we saw with the attack on Iran, I think was the son of Donald Trump who argued, well, this doesn't really conflict with America first because my dad, he came up with the concept and he decides what it means. So sometimes America first means to stay out of wars, other times America first means to knock out adversaries. So, but this isn't really a clearly articulated American interest. So it's not even clearly articulated how to pursue your interests. So what are these main interests? Do you see the way Trump pursues them?
So, in classical foreign policy thinking, realist foreign policy thinking, you do want to have clear objectives that are clearly communicated to your interlocutors, the people you're trying to interact with, either to get something or to support something that they're doing. I'll disagree with you slightly when you said America first presumed, if I understood you correctly, a retreat from the idea of hegemony.
Or at least prioritizing security of allies, this kind of building up allies, I guess.
Now,
If you saw in the first years of the Cold War, essentially, the U.S. gave a lot of very favorable trade agreements to Europeans and other frontline states in order to make sure that West Germany was the good Germany, that Taiwan was the good China, that South Korea was the good Korea. So a lot of, I would define them at least generous trade agreements to build up its capitalist allies being stronger than the communist counterpart. But
well, I think what Trump is pursuing is his own variant of hegemony. In other words, making America first is not, as some of his supporters would have hoped, looking inward. It isn't necessarily connected to that. It is in terms of certain domestic issues that have foreign policy ramifications, securing the border, reducing immigration, the flow of drugs and crime and things like that. There is a push in the America First movement to focus more on making sure that America's interests in the with respect to the countries surrounding it are promoted above the interests of our neighbors. And this is much to Canada's dismay. I mean, Mexico, we could always assume, was not necessarily to be taken as seriously, their concerns, because they are a poorer neighbor, not a rival. But Canada, is like a stepbrother to us. And they didn't really expect this kind of attitude. But with respect to foreign policy, what Trump is, I think, his vision of America first is one that secures however he defines America's best interests. It could be increasing our military alliances with certain countries. It could be reducing them. It could be, it is definitely using economic leverage as a weapon, something that the West has long accused Russia of doing, but no one does it as blatantly as the United States. And among American presidents who have always used this power, No one has done so more than Trump, more blatantly than Trump. So, but this is in the pursuit of whatever, again, as I see it, tactical advantage there is to be achieved, particularly for Trump in the domestic arena. So it's very telling that the Iran war had to be ended before the discussion of the budget began in the Senate and the House. That had to be the sequence, because if it couldn't be ended before the domestic agenda, which is more important to him, overtook and overshadowed everything else, it couldn't have been pursued. I mean, that's the way I understand it, and that's how I understand the way I see the reason for the quick ending, for the modest strike, which yields, and it's important that it yield for the president a political benefit that lasts weeks. It doesn't need to be real. It doesn't need to actually show that the Iranian nuclear weapons program has been demolished, as he claims. This will probably be revised many times in the future. But from his perspective, it has to last and provide him a significant political boost in his battle currently to achieve his budget, which is overshadowing everything else, and which is one reason why we're not going to have any bombings in the next, well, probably this month. By the end of, as long as the budget is still being negotiated and reconciled between the two houses of Congress, and until that final decision, we are in for a relatively peaceful U.S. foreign policy, with just proclamations as to why we have won and why whatever we did will be successful, has been successful, and this will be backed up by Trump loyalists, and it's all showmanship, I would say, right now. So for the future, however, it leaves the United States, again, without any real doctrine. Now, we had a doctrine. There is a liberal doctrine. The Biden doctrine, the Obama, before that, various Democratic presidents going back to Clinton. Despite their differences, they all agreed that there was a liberal world order that the United States had a vested interest in expanding and promoting. And it did so through propaganda, through soft power of its cultural benefits, the benefits of trade and capitalism, globalization. And it did so militarily through alliances, which occasionally needed to be backed up by the use of limited force, but in coalition with other members of the West, to assert some abstract principle of international politics, which was clearly in the interests of the United States, actually, and not backed by international law. As we know subsequently, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, probably much of the war on terror, which was conducted illegally, and now the war in Iran. But it was nevertheless, and the bombing of Yugoslavia. Despite these individual activities, they were always justified from the perspective of international law. Nowadays, the rhetoric has changed so that the Trump administration argues that we're not really that concerned about international law. We're not even sure it's worth the paper it's written on. What is, however, crucial is American power, and we need to exercise that power in order to remind other nations of their obligations to uphold the order that American power has created. The content of this world order is really nothing beyond Western dominance and a world order favorable to the United States, first and foremost, and to those allies that the United States considers loyal. There's nothing else. There's no international law beyond that, or international order hoped for beyond that. If I were to bet, I would say that that's where we are right now. It's the revelation of the harsher aspects, the harsher side of what was always American foreign policy, at least clearly since World War II, since the end of World War II, but that has been disguised in liberal rhetoric. It is likely to continue, is that disguising in liberal rhetoric is something that will probably return after the Trump era.
But one of the things he responds to, which seems reasonable, is what I mentioned before, that the U.S. hegemonic model relied too much on alliances, which was seen as draining U.S. resources, which is why Trump was quite hostile and pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, NAFTA, things which elevated the United States to a leadership role, but also was seen as allies draining the resources of the United States. So it does appear that, if not giving up on dominance, that it's more about making hegemony more sustainable by we're building up U.S. power as opposed to relying on these alliance systems. But
there was a liberal power argument. So the liberals would, in response to the critique that you are undermining America first or America's interest, would say, no, look at the network we're creating and the conditions and limitations that it is posing on the world, and the way that we are able to manipulate this intricate network of financial, military, and legal institutions, and subsequently, after the Carter administration, also human rights organizations and NGOs, to our benefit in the long run. The disagreement there was not about tactics. The disagreement was about the ultimate vision. And that ultimate vision, that disagreement remains, because it is not clear what the liberal vision truly is, because no liberal internationalist can stand up and say what they truly believe, which, if they do believe this, but it's certainly the logical endpoint of a liberal globalism, is a world government. And in the world government, in a true world government, the United States would have a vote, a powerful vote, or an important vote, but not the only vote. And no liberal internationalist can say that, can admit that, and make that a cause in American politics. Whereas on the other side, the conservatives just see that, or the realists just see that as a, a fantasy that we don't even need to indulge in. Politics is only about power today and power that can bring us benefits in a very foreseeable political time frame. That 5 years, 2 years, 2, 3, 4, at most 5 years. And beyond that, who knows?
But Trump evidently sees this elaborate network building as being a source of weakness, because this is a theme he's had since at least the 1980s, where he argued that the rest of the world sees us as suckers. They take advantage of us because our leaders are stupid and weak. This is more or less what he's been saying for the past 40 plus years. Now,
If we accept the limitations,
yeah,
we can still join these organizations. I think the Trump strategy is to say,
yeah, but from a position of
we'll join your
strength, yeah.
organization, but we will do exactly what we want, and you will do exactly what we want in our organization. Then we'll be part of your organization. And we had Mark saying, "Yes, Daddy."
No, but this is my point, though, that if this is the problem which he has identified, that if the problem is just weak American leaders, then he is the solution, because he argues what we need is a great negotiator, one that's willing to put pressure. And as you also write in your article, this is more or less his main approach, this aggressive diplomacy, and if it doesn't work, then overwhelming military force. And this was always one of my concerns about Trump, because if he's the great negotiator and he puts forward these very high demands and he's not successful, what happens then? Because it is a common theme with the Chinese or the whole world with the tariffs, for example. He took a great pleasure, it seemed, when he was saying that, I put tariffs on the whole world. Now they're all calling me, trying to get a deal from us. So the whole world kind of running to America, bending over backwards in order to make, agree to anything that he says. Of course, it didn't play out like this. And this is one of the frustrations with China, that they seem comfortable to sit on the sideline and wait for the US to come to them instead. And same with the Russians, the idea that, we'll offer a ceasefire and that's it. And, the Russians will come to us. And, but for the Russians, they saw this or see this as an existential threat. So they have a limited room for maneuver. So what happens when they don't get their deal? There's
two categories of countries that are not susceptible for different reasons to the blandishments of the Trump bluff, the bluff that we will destroy you economically, militarily, you'll be isolated, you'll be nothing if you don't do what we say. And these two, one of them is acknowledged indirectly by Vance, and the other is not. And they're at the extremes. So on the one hand, there are the nuclear powers, because you can't bluff them, because the power differential in the nuclear arena is not large enough. Unleashing one nuclear weapon from whatever small number is stockpiled, for example, by, we assume, North Korea, would end that taboo. And that is not something that the Trump administration would be willing to countenance. And there's nothing they can do to respond to that. They can't, in retaliation for one nuke used by North Korea, they can't, obliterate all of North Korea. I mean, that would be clearly an inhuman response. So, and at the other side, so I think something else has to be thought of as a way of dealing with nuclear powers, or powers that have their finger on some essential resource necessary to the West. And we could think of various examples of that, but I think that's comparable to engaging in a fight with another nuclear power of the United States. And the other is a country that is weak, and they see the disparity in power, but they believe they have no choice but to fight regardless of the disparity of power. So they just ignore it. They just say, yes, you have all the power. And we North Vietnamese during the Vietnam War, we could be wiped out, but we're going to fight for 20, 30, 40, 50 years until you get tired, because you will not use overwhelming force and you don't have the stamina to continue this fight indefinitely. And that calculus has in the past proven to be correct. It was Secretary of State George C. Marshall, after whom the Marshall Plan is named, who testified before Congress that America cannot, given its political system and its internal dynamics, conduct a foreign war for more than 7 years, he argued. Now, I think he was coming out of the experience of World War II. And we have seen the United States been able to engage in longer wars. The longest war over 20 years that the United States fought was in Afghanistan. And there are the modern wars, as we see, can be conducted without involving large groups of the population. There are professionals, maybe you could almost call them domestic mercenaries, who are a professional caste sent to war. The economy, if necessary, a significant portion of it, but not a damaging portion for the rest of the economy, is devoted to keeping those resources available. And of course, you create a pro-military culture in order to ensure that these people and their families are valued for their efforts on behalf of the national elite. But that sort of war, it seems, can be conducted indefinitely, or at least in the span of decades. As Medinsky, the chief Russian negotiator in Turkey with Ukraine, said at the last meeting, he said, Peter the Great conducted the Great Northern War over 21 years. We are ready to do the same, he said to his Ukrainian interlocutors. Can you say the same for your country? I don't know what the response was. I only ever see that portion of the dialogue. But it's an astute comment, because I think the assumption that countries can conduct very significant and damaging military operations at low cost to themselves domestically is a new reality. And we have to figure out how to deal with that. In some ways, you could say Israel has been that way since its inception and is likely to continue as long as it exists to be in that regime. You know, they have a militarized society, but most of the time, most of the people conduct normal lives, and the war goes on at some in the background, as it were, and you just get used to that noise. You just get inured to it. There are people arguing for the same model for Ukraine, and others who say that would be unacceptable and would lead ultimately. I was reading a piece today in Strana UA, which argued that the result of such a prolonged, even if low intensity warfare, would be much more damaging to Ukraine than Russia, because there's not a comparable depth there of resources, military, political, civil, and economic. And as a result, it would lead to the collapse of Ukrainian statehood and the absorption of the country by Russia. So the alternative, that the peace that needs to be embraced, is one that falls short of that. You don't want to push the war effort to that extreme in Ukraine.
Yeah, it's well, I just thought the last step of this, you outlined the Trump Doctrine, was the after using force to get out of there as quick as possible. I thought this assumption about escalation control, that this might be another flaw in this doctrine, because I have a feeling he might not be able to get out of these wars which he has joined, being, for example, the war on Iran, that it's not truly over.
Right.
But that remains to be seen.
Well, the
Anyways,
question is, there's a big risk here. So I mentioned the two countries that you don't want to get involved in, that I think this approach would fail toward. The countries in the middle, who are susceptible because they have so many interconnections with the American network, the Western current world order, that for them it's a transaction. I'll lose something, but I'll gain something as well. And hopefully we can make a deal that won't be as damaging to us as making an enemy of the United States. But the problem is, as soon as the first major country that is neither a nuclear power nor a clear enemy calls America's bluff, and America does not follow through with a quote unquote nuclear option, not in a literal nuclear sense, but in the sense of devastating their economy and their political ties, because they opposed reaching an acceptable tariff deal. As soon as that bluff is called, I think you have a card that can no longer be played. It's like in a card game, there are certain types of card games where you hide your trump card, but once you play it, everyone knows what it is, and you can't use it anymore. You can only use it for that one argument, for that one round, because everyone will now know how to rearrange their cards in order not to succumb to your to that one advantage that you have in your cards. So my point is, it's a very risky, high risk strategy that is likely to fail at some point. It's interesting that Canada is really challenging the premise, and I think not without reason, because there could be a backlash in the United States among a large group of people who cannot think of Canadians. They just think of Canadians as very similar to us. And there's really, and they speak the language, and they can come on American television and defend themselves in perfect English, unlike most of the rest of the world. That's a very dangerous situation for this approach on foreign policy. So, but on the other hand, we can never underestimate the ability of the government in power to control the narrative, especially in the United States. This has been proven time and time again through many wars that the mainstream media takes the narrative of the government as gospel at first, and it has to be insisted and proven to them consistently that that they are being lied to before they will allow themselves to challenge it, because their natural instinct, the natural instinct of the mainstream media in the United States, is to uphold and support the government, because it is a democracy, our democracy. When I, as a reporter, support the government, I am supporting democracy writ large. That's an even higher good for the nation than my disagreements with this or that president.
Well, Professor Petro, thank you for your time, my friend. I appreciate the opportunity to pick your brain. So, yeah, thank you for your insight. And yeah, for anyone who hasn't read the Trump Doctrine, I would advise, yeah, to look through it. Yeah, it made me think for a while. So, yeah,
It
thanks
was on
again.
the realist review, James Cardin's Substack. Yeah. Thank you.